YugiNoNo!
Okay, so many of you have expressed a great interest in what is known as GOAT format. So in this video I'm going to be doing an introduction to the format as well as showing some basic tactics and relevant decks and card choices. The format is very in-depth and it would take me forever to explain everything, but hopefully by watching this video and getting some practice with your friends you can master the format. Also, if this video gets enough attention, maybe Konami will start hosting Legacy format events. I'm not holding my breath, but one can always hope, right? Okay, so starting off with the time frame. GOAT format lasted from April 2005 until October 2005, and it is highly regarded as one of the best and most skillful formats of all time. The format is called GOAT format because Scapegoats was a very popular card choice for many different reasons. The main reason being that the dominant deck at the time, known as GOAT Control, used this card with Metamorphosis to make Thousand Eyes Restrict, but we will get more into the standard GOAT deck as well as other decks later in the video. And since this is the April 2005 format, it obviously follows the April 2005 ban list. And the ban list is as follows. For banned monster cards, we have Chaos Emperor Dragon, Fiberjar, Magical Scientist, Makura the Destructor, Witch of the Black Forest, and Yada Garasu. For spells, we have Butterfly Dagger Elma, Change of Heart, Confiscation, Dark Hole, Harpy's Feather Duster, Mirage of Nightmare, Monster Reborn, Painful Choice Raigeki, and the Forceful Sentry. And the only banned trap card is Imperial Order. For our limited monsters, we have BLS, Breaker the Magical Warrior, Cyberjar, Dark Magician of Chaos, DD Warrior Lady, Exiled Force, Exodia the Forbidden One in all of his limbs, Injection Fairy Lily, Jinzo, Morphing Jar, Protector of the Sanctuary, Reflect Bounder, Sacred Phoenix, Sangan, Sinister Serpent, Tribe Infecting Virus, and Twin-Headed Behemoth. The limited spells are Card Destruction, Delinquent Duo, Graceful Charity, Heavy Storm, Lightning Vortex, Mage Power, Mystical Space Typhoon, Pot of Greed, Premature Burial, Snatch Steal, Swords of Revealing Light, and United We Stand. And for the limited trap cards, we have Call of the Haunted, Ceasefire, Deck Devastation Virus, Magic Cylinder, Mirror Force, Reckless Greed, Ring of Destruction, and Torrential Tribute. For our semi-limited cards for the monsters, we have Abyss Soldier, Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, Manticore of Darkness, Marauding Captain, Night Assailant, and Vampire Lord. For semi-limited spells, we have Creature Swap, Emergency Provisions, Level Limit Area B, Nobleman of Crossout, Reinforcement of the Army, and Upstart Goblin. And for the semi-limited trap cards, we have Good Goblin Housekeeping, Gravity Bind, and Last Turn. Now, the sets that are legal for this format are every set from Legend of Blue Eyes to the Lost Millennium. So there is a really great card pool here that includes a lot of classic cards. What we know as GOAT format ended with the release of Cybernetic Revolution, as Cyber Dragon greatly changed the way that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was played. So now that we have gone over the ban list and legal sets, let's talk about priority, as it is very important if one is to stay true to the format. Priority is a term that refers to a player's right to be able to activate his or her card's effects as Chain Link 1. Priority does not allow players to automatically activate and resolve effects without a chain, but simply assures a card's activation as Chain Link 1. So simply put, if your opponent has a monster on the field in a bottomless trap hole set, and you summon, let's just say, Blackluster Soldier, and your opponent activates bottomless trap hole, you can make BLS's effect a Chain Link 1, banishing their monster. I know these days that seems insane, but at the same time, that is how Yu-Gi-Oh! Was played back then. Also, one needs to remember original card text. For example, in the case of Sinister Serpent, before the errata, you would add this card back to your hand every standby phase, which makes this card very valuable in maintaining card advantage by circumventing costs, and also by providing protection against Delinquent Duo. One also needs to remember the original rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time. The most important example is drawing on your first turn. In other words, both players started with 6 cards. This made the die roll very, very important, as going first gave you a big advantage. Before we get into different decks and strategies, we are going to talk about some basic card choices that pretty much every deck played. So let's start with what is known as the Trinity. And the Trinity is Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, and Delinquent Duo. Greed and Graceful lets you see cards, and Duo takes cards away from your opponent. There are ways to maximize the effectiveness of these cards by playing Night Assailant, for example, which works perfectly with Charity. Or as I've stated with Duo, Sinister Serpent is a great defense. The other staple spells were Heavy Storm, Snatch Steal, Premature Burial, Mystical Space Typhoon, Nobleman of Crossout, and Book of Moon. Heavy Storm, Snatch Steal, and Premature Burial I also consider to be power spells because they can greatly change the state of the game when played at the right time. And of course, when playing Standard GOAT, Scapegoats, and Metamorphosis are your staples, as well as being the heart and soul of the deck. And the staple traps we have are Mirror Force, Call of the Haunted, Ring of Destruction, Torrential Tribute, Sakuretsu Armor, and depending on on one's preference, Dust Tornado. But looking back at the format, another great trap choice is Trap Dust Shoot, but most modern GOAT decks will side it instead of maining it. As for staple monsters, we're going to break this down into two groups. Monsters basically every deck plays as staple, and then we will add the staples for GOAT decks, Chaos decks, and other decks. So for the basic staple monsters, we have Breaker the Magical Warrior, Tribe Infecting Virus, Sinister Serpent, Sangan, Morphing Jar, and I also include Xerion Universe, as Xerion Universe is a great card against GOAT tokens. And then expanding on that, we have monsters like Magician of Faith, Magical Merchant, Air Knight Parshaft, Tsukiyomi, and of course Blackluster Soldier. These card choices vary between standard GOAT and Chaos decks, but they both play Faith and Merchant for sure. This is because they can both be very powerful. Merchant can help you get through your deck more quickly, but Faith is definitely the better card here, because it can recycle Pot of Greed or Graceful Charity from your graveyard for you to use again, or at the very least she can get you back an MST or even a Delinquent Duo. Then we have other great cards like the Warrior Engine, which is DD Warrior Lady, DD Assailant, and Exiled Force. And the Warrior Engine is made consistent because Rhoda was at 2. And then we have other cards like Ashura Priest, which is great at killing GOAT tokens, or Jinzo that stops traps. And these are all great cards, but they vary from deck to deck. So now that we have gone through staple cards, let's talk about deck choices. And I'm going to mostly be talking about the main 3 decks that modern GOAT players use. I'm not discrediting other decks at all, because all decks around this time were pretty great and fun to use. Just for time's sake, as this is more of a basic introduction, we are just going to be talking about the main 3. So we're going to kick this off, of course, with GOAT Control, or what's known as Standard GOAT. This is the deck that the format is named after, and literally the defining deck of the format, both at the time and present day. This is because it wins by not only gaining and maintaining card advantage, but Thousand Eyes Restrict is an excellent control card. The main goal of Standard GOAT is to get out Thousand Eyes Restrict using Metamorphosis. You use Metamorphosis on any level 1 monster such as Faith, Serpent, or of course a GOAT token. You can then suck up an opponent's monster and gain its attack. Also, with Thousand Eyes' effect, no monsters can attack but Thousand Eyes, which is one of the control aspects. But what really gives the deck control is setting Restrict with either Book of Moon or Tsukiyomi and sucking up another monster. Doing this repeatedly is what makes the deck what it is. You not only put your opponent in a bind, but you also keep gaining card advantage this way. People change a few cards here and there depending on their preference, but this is card for card the build that everybody goes by, made popular by Chris Perovic and his accomplishments with the deck. Next up, we have one of my favorites, which is Chaos. And there are a few variants of this deck, which are Chaos Turbo, Chaos Control, and Chaos Recruiter. This is probably the second most popular deck behind Standard GOAT, and can very well generate more advantage than GOAT depending on the game. This is because, like I stated earlier, the deck plays Merchant and Faith, but the deck also plays Night Assailant and Decoichi. These cards can help you gain massive advantage. Decoichi lets you draw a card when it's flipped, and Assailant recycles any flip monster from the graveyard, which is perfect with Charity. You can also perform what is known as the Assailant Loop, which is where you discard an Assailant for another copy of Assailant from your grave, and then you just keep doing this motion repeatedly. This is relevant in the deck not just because of Charity, but because Tribe Infecting Virus, allowing you to blow up multiple monsters with literally no cost. But the main point behind every variant of this deck is to make big Chaos monsters. These monsters being Chaos Sorcerer and BLS. Chaos Sorcerer being at 3 at the time. Playing Thunder Dragons makes summoning these monsters very easy because you pitch Thunder Dragons to the grave and also thin your deck. This gives you light fuel in the graveyard. Then most of your monsters are dark already, so it's pretty simple to summon your boss monsters. And then last of the big 3, we have my favorite, which is Zoo Beatdown. Its win condition is not to gain advantage and overwhelm your opponent, but to keep your opponent on the fence from the start of the duel. This is accomplished by playing the biggest and best beat sticks available at the time that make your opponent use resources to stay alive. Cards like Berserk Gorilla, Bazoo the Soul Eater, and Xerion Universe. And also Abyss Soldier, which lets you discard a water monster to bounce an opponent's card, keeping pressure on your opponent. Zoo often forces a top decking war, which the deck usually wins because of the sheer number of big monsters that you are likely to draw into. This deck also mains the previously discussed Warrior Engine to out big monsters like Blackluster Soldier. It also mains a lot of traps that vary from player to player, but mainly the staples I discussed before. But players will also main deck Skill Drain or Solemn Judgment. This is because the deck doesn't worry about resources as much as other decks and is more concerned with being aggressive. So like I said, those are the 3 main decks that most GOAT players play. But there are many others, and I'm just going to go over a few. So next up we have Monarchs, which is a deck that wins by tributing your opponent's monsters for big beat sticks with great effects. This is is done with cards like Brain Control, which was at 3 at the time, Soul Exchange, and of course Snatch Steal. Then we have the legendary Benkai OTK, which wins by using equipped spells on Armed Samurai Benkai to immensely beef him up and attack for epic wins. And then we have your zombie variants, which mainly either use Spirit Reaper to pick cards out of an opponent's hand, or they will turbo Vampire Lord onto the field. The last deck I'm going to be mentioning is Empty Jar, which is the main alternative win condition of the format. The goal of this deck is to deck out your opponents, forcing an automatic win. These are just the most commonly used decks. There are many other decks, engines, and strategies available, such as the Magician Engine or Tomato Engine. Another great thing about the format is that it's not going anywhere, and since we can keep looking back at the format, we can keep innovating decks and card choices. For example, Zoo Beatdown was not a deck that really anybody played back in April 2005, but looking back at the format and the cards that were available at the time, it's arguably the best deck. And a cool card choice that I came up with is Regenerating Mummy, which is an 1800 attack beater that also helps duo-proof your deck. Although it is mainly intended for a zombie deck, it can technically be splashed into anything. I hope this introduction gives you guys watching a basic grasp of the format. GOAT format is just way too in-depth, and there are so many tactics to cover as well as other card choices, it's just too much for one video. There are also probably a dozen or more other viable decks that can be discussed. The format is just so diverse yet standardized at the same time, and that's why players always gravitate towards it. I absolutely love GOAT format, guys. It's actually the main format that I play, but I also play a variety of other formats. If you guys want to see more GOAT videos or more introduction videos on other formats, then be sure to leave a comment down below, and as always, dick slap that like button and subscribe.
Subscribe!